Quiet, numbskulls. I'm broadcasting.
Hello, you're listening to the podcast, So There I Was. This is episode number 107, Bad-Assery and Jack-Assery with Whisky.
Yeah, man. Oh, some good stuff. A couple admin things we need to wander through, Fig.
We just broke 1,100 members on our Facebook group.
Yes.
So please keep sharing, because that's awesome. And we owe it to Bago, our Facebook, what do we call him? Registrar, administrator?
Producer, administrator, manager.
He's running the show over there, and he's doing a fantastic job. And finally got to meet him face to face.
Yeah. We went to Cherry Point this weekend and spent some of our time on base when we weren't in traffic.
Oh, my gosh.
Did that suck or what? Fig and I both gave up after a couple hours. A 12-mile drive, over 2.5 hours, still not anywhere near getting in the front gate for the air show. And we gave up.
That was less than optimum.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like you said, cigars and whiskey. But reattacked and got it done. But we had a great visit on Friday where we had behind-the-scenes look at, holy cow, the F-35, the new F-35 squadron spaces. We went through our old stomping grounds, VMA 223, and then we had a VMA 231 CO got us through the sterile access point there. We had a couple great babysitters that he assigned to us, just kind of chaperone us while we went willy-nilly all over the place. I know.
Yeah.
Thanks to
it was kind of cool. We were sitting there at the end of the 231 hangar, and if they didn't drag the VMA 223 air show static jet over to the wash rack so that they could give it its last bath before the air show.
It was perfect timing.
We were standing there talking.
We made a little deal with the guys that were wash plane that they would tow it out onto the ramp where we could get a clear shot without buildings behind it and get pictures taken. And by the way, big thanks to those contract guys.
Indeed.
We owed them a couple cases of beer, which Double L is working on administratively through Possum to make sure we get those guys taken care of for that.
Thank you. Go. Yeah. And thank you to Possum for, he's the CO at 231 who made our tour happen. So we're grateful to you for that. The other thing I was shocked by, Fig, is we were talking, those contract guys recognized our voices and they're like, oh, you're Fig and Repeat.
Oh, yeah. That was
voices.
That was a little surreal, wasn't it?
Felt like a star.
Yeah. Well, thank you, gents, for being listeners, and we'll try not to disappoint.
Right. And I don't think this week's going to disappoint. And for those of you who are pilots, we got a new sponsor this week who caters to pilots. It's called FTIratings.com. That's Flight Training International. So those of you who are looking to get your ATP or your ATP CTP, and you know what that is if you need it, and or a jet type rating, you can get it with FTIratings.com. You don't have to go rent a twin Comanche and suffer in the heat and the stink of an old airplane that's 50 years old and may or may not have been maintained real well. And
right.
All that, you know.
Right.
Go do it in a nice air-conditioned simulator. Use your veterans benefits, and when you mention So There I Was, you get $100 off at FTIratings.com. Reach out to them to help ease your transition to the majors. So, hey, this week, Whisky, what a great guest, sent our way by none other than Duber, our first 53 driver. No, I take that back. Luke was our first 53 driver on the show.
Well, technically, yeah, he sure was, wasn't he?
Yeah, who came to Harriers later. But
thanks to Duber. Thank you, Duber, for sending us Whisky.
Yeah, and Whisky, he wrote a book called Hangar 4, and we should have called this episode Hangar 4, and we had every intention of doing so until he dropped the line Bad-Assery and Jack-Assery.
Just couldn't let that go.
No.
Right? Couldn't let it go, man.
Have to name a show like that. So.
Yeah. What a great book. What a great interview. Absolutely. I don't want to spoil too much, but what can we tease here? First combat mission was a doozy.
Yeah. Opens the show with that tease. Let's just put it this way. They had to tape the airplane back together to get it out of the LZ in his first combat mission ever.
Yeah.
Oh, man. But I'll tell you, here is the interesting thing about it. I never want to get in a helicopter again if I don't have to. I just don't. It's who I am.
I can honestly
say. But if I had to fly a helicopter, I always thought that I would have wanted to fly Cobras. But that 53, he made it sound like a lot of fun. And holy smokes. This weekend, I got to see the 53 Echo and the 53 Kilo, which is the new 4-engine variant. Good God, that thing looks 25-30% bigger. What a beast that airplane is. Oh, my God. It looks really cool to fly. Way overpowered. And
that's a good thing.
Yeah. So, if you got to fly a Hilo, make sure it's an overpowered one, would be my guess. But
right.
But I digress. He went to WTI, which, as we talked about before, is the kind of the Top Gun for Marines. MAGTF, Marine Aircraft Task Force, training together.
Well, shit, he not only went, but eventually went back to be an instructor for 3 years.
He did. Yeah, but I found it really interesting that when he went as a student, that he and his compadres that had combat time, most of them had more experience in combat than the instructors that were at WTI. It was that weird time frame when
just sign of the times.
Those guys hadn't been there yet. So that was really different. But the book, just amazing.
It's an easy read. He really writes well.
Yeah, get that on Amazon. I thought it was interesting that he kept a journal. He said he didn't know why, but he just kept a journal, and that was what he was able to use and go back and get accurate references.
Yeah,
for his entire career. Retired lieutenant colonel. Neat guy. Easy interview, funny interview, and he did a nice little bit of extra with us afterwards. For those of you who want to go to sotherewas.us/Patreon, give us $5 a month, and you get exclusive content, the extras that they do.
Once again, another story about livestock. Yeah. Well, that's all I'm gonna say.
Oh dear God. Yeah. It's been a while since we've killed livestock, and
what do you say? No livestock were harmed
during the telling of this story.
That's from telling of this story. What do you say?
It's a bullshit story, and we're stuck with it. I say, don't sit on the collective. Let's get out of the way and hear what Whisky has to say. You're going to love this one, folks.
Don't sit on it.
In the world's smallest cockpit, on the tanker, through the weather. Oh, and to the tanker crew who did that, thanks a lot. We really appreciated that. I'm just kidding. No, I'm not. Well, there I was, crossing the pond, and you could see that I wasn't exactly fond of all the...
So there I was. March 21st, 2003, my first combat flight ever. I'm part of a big flight of Marine Corps CH-46s and 53s, and we're inserting a bunch of Marines into the port of Qasr, Iraq, to secure the port. So we end up on final, and we get hung up. Worst case scenario for a helicopter guy, right? High, hot, heavy. We got a recon team in the back with an interim fast attack vehicle, a couple of dirt bikes, and some other cool gear they had. But the landing zone got clogged up because it was a parking lot that was unexpectedly covered with sand. So everyone's having a hard time getting down. So we basically end up in a hover over this damn port. I finally start to pull in power to just take it around. As soon as I did, I get this audible popping sound. Just in rapid succession, these pops. And immediately I was like, oh shit, I just got shot down in my first combat flight. And for about 3 seconds, I was just livid pissed. And then I realized, because I was flying with our XO, he yells out like, compressor stall on number 1. So I realized basically what happened is, the engine coughed because we had no airspeed in this hover and we lost it. But regardless of the reason, we're now essentially falling out of the sky because we had 2 engines left, but that wasn't enough power to support the weight that we had on board. So we're coming down and forward, that my co-pilot, my XO, is yelling at me. He's like, forward, because we were over the water at the time. Just forward of the water, once you go feet dry, there was a cinder block wall. So that was my second concern, was we're going to hit this damn wall and break the aircraft in half. Well, meanwhile, there's this giant dust cloud in front of us that's been kicked up from the zone, and we're going into it. So somewhere about 150 feet, now I'm blind. I'm still on the controls. I'm trying to get this thing to go as far forward as I can while we're coming down. My whole plan that I had, a second to concoct was I'm just going to wait until I can see the ground, which will probably be around 10 feet, pull whatever power we have left, hope it works out. So the next couple of seconds felt like a lifetime, but that's exactly how it worked out. I'm just leaning over my left shoulder, looking straight down, hoping I'm going to see the ground. I finally did, right around 10 feet as expected, pull all the power we have left. We still hit the ground pretty damn hard. So we hit the ground and we're not stopping. And I can tell we're moving forward, but I couldn't right away tell exactly what was happening. XO's yelling, brakes, brakes, brakes. And I'm like, I'm on the goddamn brakes. It's not working. And then I finally realized what was happening is we were bouncing across the ground. So the aircraft finally comes to a stop. We're very left wing down, nose up. I've got a BIM light, meaning something's wrong with one of my blades. And the dust is clearing. Meanwhile, the recon Marines are amazing. They just jump off and jump right into a gunfight like nothing happened. Like they have no idea. They just assume we suck at landing or something. But they get off the aircraft. Dust clears. There's literally like 5 feet between our rotor arc and the aircraft in front of us. So we got lucky. We stopped just in time. And so we're kind of sitting there watching this gunfight unfold around us. And the XO and I look at each other and we were like, well, we're not staying here. Let's get the hell out of here. So we just pulled power, and at that point we had enough to get going with 2 and got the hell out of Dodge. And then he managed to get that engine back online in flight, took it back to Kuwait, landed, and everyone's a little rattled, I would say. We get out of the aircraft and realize what happened is we hit the ground so hard, it popped the top of the main mount strut on our left main mount landing gear off. And that thing had gone up through the sponson and also taken a chunk out of one of the rotor blades. Looked like someone shot a softball through
Oh,
it.
shit.
That's why we were sitting so left wing down. And so anyway, what we ended up doing was we literally cargo strapped the main mount to the frame so it wouldn't fall off, duct taped the rotor blade, fired it back up, and flew back out to the ship. That was my first combat flight.
That hurt. Oh, my God. Okay. Well, we should end the show there, Fig, because you can't
all right.
that. That is how terrifying and great aviation tales begin. What the hell were you thinking?
Yeah, it was an eye-opener.
That's how people decide, you know what, I'd rather be a Kenny shoe salesman.
I've got to tell you, I came out of that experience and I was like, oh, wow, that happened. It's eye-opening. But honestly, I also acknowledge now, especially, I liked it. It was exciting. It was the most exciting thing that ever happened to me. I was ready to go.
Well, you were young and bulletproof at the time, right?
I was very much.
Lieutenants are, so.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
I was that guy.
Everybody. Repeat here. You're listening to So There I Was. I'm home tonight in New Hampshire. Where's my co-host, Fig?
Hey, I'm out in Denver, Colorado for a few more days. And I am pleased to say we have with us Whisky.
Nice.
Welcome, Whisky. Author of the book. Shall I introduce the book?
Yeah.
Oh, go for it.
Author of the book, Hangar 4.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. I'm with you guys from San Diego today.
Nice.
How's the weather in San Diego? It's windy as hell here in Denver.
It's still a hair on the cool side for this time of year, but it's still sunny. It's nice. Can't complain.
It's 72.
Yeah, I don't think we quite got to 70 today, so a little cool for May.
Yeah, a little nice breeze off the ocean there always keeps San Diego nice and temperate. So
Whisky, we ask everybody.
So, that sucked me into terror. Go.
Yeah.
How did you get into aviation? What was the catalyst
true
that
story?
got you? Yes.
This is a true story. So I'm in college. I'm going to college because I think I'm supposed to, not because I actually care about it or really want to be there. So I'm majoring in, business. I'm over at the business school doing some things and learning some advertising and some marketing. I'm doing an internship the summer after my junior year of college, and I hate it. It's at an advertising agency. So I get done with my little intern shift one night, head out to my parents' house. That was in Lubbock, Texas. They lived on the outskirts of town. And my dad's sitting in the driveway in a lawn chair having a drink, which is his summer evening wind down. So I pull up a lawn chair, grab a beer. We start talking. I'm basically telling him, I don't like what I'm doing. I don't like what I'm studying, blah, blah, blah. He gets annoyed. But from their driveway,
He's paying tuition, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like we're paying for you to go to school, and then you're saying you don't want to do it. What's your problem? But from their driveway, you could see the T-37s in the pattern at Reese Air Force Base, which was a training base still at the time. And so I'm sitting there talking to my dad. I'm looking over at those airplanes, and I just kind of out of nowhere said, you know what? I'm going to do that. And he's like, what? And I was like, I'm going to be a pilot in the military. And when I said that, I didn't know a damn thing about it, to be honest with you. And he looked at me like it was the dumbest thing I'd ever said, which was a fair reaction, given the randomness of the comment. And he just got up and went in the house. He didn't say, you can't do that, you're an idiot, or yeah, by all means, go do it. He just looked at me like I was crazy, got up and went in the house. But right there, I was like, I'm going to figure this out. And so began the quest to figure it out.
Nice.
Took about a year to do all the homework, talk to the different services, etc. And then I had an uncle at the time, he was married to my dad's sister, who was a Marine. So he comes to town as I'm going through this process and basically hard sells me on Marine Corps aviation, which in fairness, I would say sounded pretty damn intimidating at first. But I was like, Marine Corps, that's hardcore.
Yeah. Right.
But the more he talked, the more it sounded good. Next thing I knew, I was taking a test with an OSO and a PFT and got a flight contract and took off in the summer of 97 for OCS.
Summer of 97. So you did the 10-week program, AOC or OCS?
Yep, I think they called it OCC at the time. But yeah, just 10 weeks straight, and then you're done.
Wow.
Okay. Right over to the basic school.
How about that? With an air contract.
That is.
Well, you figured it out,
funny.
Marine.
I can see that sitting on the porch with Dad, and he's just going, "Oh man, yeah,
I did. I figured it out.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
so,
it worked out great.
So you had the air contract. So did you have the attitude in the basic school, FigMac? Fuck it, I got my air contract.
No, I didn't, because I had a platoon commander at the basic school who was a hard-ass infantry officer. And in fairness, I love the guy. He's still one of the most quotable Marines I was ever around. He used to say the funniest shit to us, and I would always crack up laughing. The one I'll never forget is, in a combined arms dilemma, the enemy doesn't know whether to shit or go blind. But he would say stuff like that constantly. Love the guy. He damn near convinced me to actually switch to infantry, but I didn't. I was like, hey, I've got this flight contract. I want to see it through. But TBS went well. Drink a little bit of the Marine Corps Kool-Aid there for sure, and then headed down to flight school in Pensacola.
Oh, there you go. And you can always go from flight school to infantry. It's a whole lot harder to go in the other direction.
Exactly. Yeah. There's a lot of opportunities, but they'll actually tell you to do that.
That's right.
Hey, before we get too far downrange before we get too far downrange, does anything stick out from OCS, memorable event or two that you like to talk about?
I would say, to me, the most memorable thing about OCS, and this is always what I think of when I think of OCS, is I found the drill instructors to be hilarious. So I was constantly getting my ass handed to me for laughing, because they would start going off on something, even if it was me, and I would just start snickering like I couldn't help it. So I was constantly getting yelled at and called Joker and all kinds of, stupid names like that by those guys, because I couldn't help it. I thought they were comedians to me. Like, I loved it.
Well, especially when it's happened to someone else, right? I mean, that's when it's the funniest.
For sure. There were two twins across the rack from me initially.
No way.
And they used to shake those two twins down pretty good, and I would start laughing every single time. Every time. Ongoing joke about which one of you am I looking at and the whole thing, but it was funny. It was so funny.
We actually had identical twins in my TBS class. Same thing. And they would screw with guys all the time as far as, who was in which platoon. So
that's funny.
Oh, man.
Yeah, I loved it. But I was always in trouble for laughing. Always.
Yeah.
So you got commissioned on graduation day from OCS?
Oh, man.
Fucking mic working?
Yep, that was when
Is this thing on?
Was OCS graduation.
Yeah,
you're good. And then immediately went over to the other side of the base and checked into the basic school.
Oh wow! Okay,
so play war for 6 months out there. No break in between.
Wow. All right.
Oh, okay.
Board.
No pool.
Pack your
all
shit.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, we literally started a few days later.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. Okay. So
yeah, it worked out.
So you make it down to Pensacola, and then where'd you go through primary and advanced? All in Milton?
No, actually, so I volunteered to go to Corpus Christi for primary because I was originally from Texas. I figured, hey, this is the only time I'll probably ever get to go be in Texas while I'm in the Marine Corps.
There you go.
So I went and
fellow boomer, right on.
Yeah, I figured I'd get some barbecue and some Whataburger out of the deal at least. So I went down to Pensacola for primary, which ended up working out really well for me just because I sort of stumbled into a mentor there that became pretty instrumental in what I ended up doing down the road while I was in primary.
Nice. Okay.
Did I read?
Well, you talked about selecting helicopters. Oh, so I'll tell you what, folks. You're going to have to bear with us tonight. For whatever reason, there appears to be about a half a second to a full second delay between my mic and Fig's mic and everything else. And so Fig and I are trying to be conscious of each other, and we keep pausing and all that. But I think that's what's going on. Anyway, I think we're going to ask about the whole selection process and whether whether you took helos or jets, and then someone chewed your ass for choosing helos when you could have gone jets, and because it is what you do on a regular basis in the Marines. It
was the whole thing. Yeah. So I'm in primary, and there's a Marine Corps major there in primary, and I to this day don't know what this guy was doing there because he was way overqualified to be a flight school instructor. So he's a Cobra pilot by trade.
Just ask him.
Yeah, Cobra pilot by trade, but this guy was like, 6'3", jacked, shaved head. He was just a total badass, and all the Marines, especially, we were just in awe of this guy.
Okay,
just completely in awe of him. So somewhere early in the syllabus, I got scheduled with him, went out and did a flight, and it went really well. And for some reason, he kind of took to me. So I just started appearing on the schedule with him pretty frequently from that point forward. Great guy. In the book, he's referred to as Wild Bill. Side note, he's one of 3 people who in the book who had to change their names for various reasons. But in the book, he's Wild Bill.
To
which
protect
is fitting,
the guilty.
Which is fitting, yeah. That was I borrowed that from G.I. Joe, the helicopter pilot. But anyway, this guy was he was awesome, and he was a badass. So I'm flying with him all the time.
Nice.
I'm drinking all the Kool-Aid that he's giving me. I'm buying everything he's selling. But I went to flight school, I think like most people, wanting to be a jet pilot, right? Like, they don't make movies about helicopter pilots, especially not assault sport guys. Like, it just doesn't sound cool. But flying with him slowly convinced me, like, you know what, maybe this rotary wing thing is cooler than I think it is. So it gets to be time to literally put my choices down between fixed wing, rotary wing, or Hercs. Heavies was the other choice. And I was kind of on the fence at that point between jets and helicopter. So I go to him and I'm like, hey, sir, I got to fill this thing out tomorrow. I'm still kind of wavering. And I'll never forget what he said. He looked me right in the eye and he goes, okay, here's the deal. He's like, in a jet at 20,000 feet, Mach 2 is just a number on a dial. But in a helicopter, 100 feet, 120 knots, looking into the man who's trying to kill you, that'll make your balls crawl up in your stomach. And I was like, okay, sold. Helicopters, done. Best sales pitch ever. So I put helicopters first. I got them, but I had good grades, like really good grades, actually. So they send me on my way. I head back to Pensacola for advanced helicopter training. And like when I get there and I'm checking in, some poor admin kid has got this note, like literally like a sticky note. And he's like, hey, Major so-and-so wants to see you when you check in. And I'm like, okay, I don't even know who this guy is. But next thing I know, I'm standing in this guy's office at attention. And he's like, hey, I've got great news. We've got your jet slot all ready to go in Meridian. We'll cut your orders and get you up there. We'll give you a week or two to get, kind of get your stuff together. And I kind of looking at him confused. And he's like, what's the problem? And I was like, sir, I put helicopters first. Like, this is where I want to be. Like, this was a choice. Like, thank you. And he just went off, like, rips me up, up and down both sides. You dumbass. Like, you should be a jet pilot. And here's all the reasons why. And I just stood there, like, just looking at him while he's reaming me. And so he finally stops and goes, I tell you what, I'll give you a day to think about it. Come back here tomorrow and tell me your decision. I was like, okay, sir. And so I came back the next day, same drill. He's like, well, what is it going to be? I was like, I want to fly helicopter, sir. He goes off on me again. But at that point, he finally let me alone. I got dismissed. I got to keep my helo slot. And then I guess he went to the next guy on the list. Who knows? But that's how I got to stay in Pensacola.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting.
And there's at least one guy there who, he's grateful you took helos.
Yeah, somewhere out there is some other Marine that's like, oh, awesome, I got the jet sled I wanted, so I'm sure it worked out. Yeah, it's all good.
Very cool. Oh, that's very
cool.
So
how did you take to the helo?
Talk about the helo. Oh, go ahead.
Very well, actually. I loved it. Like, it was a good fit right away. It just kind of clicked.
Don't tell me you're one of those guys that just hovered. Okay.
It wasn't quite that easy, but I got it down pretty fast. And I was like a super nerd, so I was always studying like a maniac, and everyone's making fun of me for it. So, academic wise, did really well. We figured out the aircraft pretty fast, and then from there, it was just trying to decide, hey, what do I want to do? Like, what do I want to fly? In the Marine Corps. And to be honest, I was just really enamored with the idea of coming out to California and the West Coast. Like, flying out of Pendleton or Miramar just sounded to me like super cool. And so I really prioritized coast over aircraft at selection time. I would have been happy with just about anything, but I like the idea of flying Cobras like my mentor had. I like the idea of the 53 just because it was a crewed aircraft, and I thought I would like the crew concept of it, and got 53s West, and it all worked out from there.
Nice. That is a monster airplane. In fact, we'll back up to Helo Flight School in a bit here, but tell me about the CH-53 Echo. Tell some of the stats and what it can do.
It's a beast of a machine. So, 100 feet long, 79-foot rotor diameter, 15,000 pounds of gas pretty much sums it up. That'll get you about 4 hours of something flight time. But it's just a hell of a capable machine. And it's really, it's an assault support platform. The mission is really nothing sexy. We used to always call it hauling ass and trash. We move people, we move things. Yep. But it can get involved in a lot of tactical operations, inserts, raids, extracts of assorted types. But it was a fun aircraft to fly, a complicated aircraft to learn because it's so big. The systems are fairly complex, very redundant in the systems. So the design was great. But one thing about the 53 that really gives guys fits early is the canted tail rotor. So it's canted 20 degrees to give a little bit of extra lift on the back end of the aircraft. But that cant means that the aircraft hovers a little bit left wing down, nose up, which takes guys a while to get used to because your natural desire as a human is to assume to make yourself level to hover. But if you do that in a 53, you're sliding forward and right at a pretty good clip. So it takes a while for guys to get used to that. Lean back, lean to my left. That's the hover attitude. And it's more pronounced in the right seat than the left seat, because in the right seat, you start feeling like you're way higher in the air when your left wing down. It's kind of hard to explain, but it takes guys a while to get the hover down in the 53 for sure.
Nice. Well, how many cans of whoop ass can sit in the back of that thing?
Well, about as many as you can stack in there. So the NATOPS would let us go up to 55.
Oh my
but
God.
At some point and that was with centerline seats, but during OIF, unfortunately, after a couple of things went wrong, we got limited to 24 passengers. But honestly, to this day, I don't know exactly what that was. Someone had a formula that decided that was an acceptable number of people should the aircraft go down. But we ran at 24 from that point forward. Every now and then we get a waiver to take more than 24 for a particular mission if it made sense. But for the most part, we'd stuck to 24 from that point forward.
Okay. Was it maybe for all their gear, their flak jackets and all that, adding extra weight?
No, it wasn't a weight issue.
It was just number pulled out of the air?
Yeah, so there was an aircraft that went down in, I'm trying to remember the exact time frame, late 2004, early 2005, and my squadron was about to go relieve that squadron when it happened. But they had a full combat load of Marines on board, and everyone in that mishap was lost. And so after that, they capped us at 24. And my understanding was it was really just for
limit exposure. That's what it was about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow. All right.
Okay. Man, it is a cool airplane. I don't know if I had to fly helos, whether it would have been Cobras or 53s. Either one of those two are cool airplanes. So
I did get to fly the Cobra some later in my career. I was a MOTS instructor, and it was a pretty fun little aircraft to fly. And I'm not a huge guy, but at 6'1", I would tell you the front seat of a Cobra is pretty tight. So I was glad that the 53 thing worked out for me. It was a little more comfortable ride.
There you go.
For sure.
Nice.
For sure.
Hey, Whiskey, so when you opened with your So There I Was story, that was your first combat mission in March. What year was that?
That was 2003, but it was actually my second deployment in the squadron. So my timing was either amazing or terrible, depending on your perspective. But I got to the fleet in December of 2000. So obviously, 9 months prior to 9/11, jump in the squadron, just, another co-pilot, like every other co-pilot, trying to stay off the skyline and work your butt off to become a decent member of the squadron that's accepted and can do their job. Went on my first deployment to Okinawa that summer. And that was still back in the old, we called it the unit deployment program rotation. So we'd chop a MUDET out to the SoCal MU, the other 3/4 of the squadron go to Okinawa. And as soon as you get there, you chop another MUDET to the 31st MU, often referred to as the 31st. And then the last half of the squadron, the 0.5, would basically just bang around the Pacific doing pretty much the same stuff you did at home. And so I was part of the main body on my first deployment, but it was a blast. I mean, we were just banging around over the Pacific, went to Korea and on some boondoggle of a det and stayed down there for like a week in Osan and, trying to drink all the OB lager they had in the city limits. And, it was just like a big time we were having. I actually got promoted to captain on that det at a bar in Osan called the Whisky A Go-Go, which is kind of fitting. But that was on September 1st, 2001. We got back to Okinawa on September the 9th, and there's a typhoon bearing down on the island. So we did what any good Marines would do, went out and bought all the beer we could find, and we were hanging out.
Empty the Class 6 out.
Yeah, totally. So we're hanging out in this lounge we had in the barracks that was called the Echo Chamber. It was actually a replica sign over my shoulder. But we're just in there drinking beers and giving each other a hard time and doing what Marine aviators do when 9/11 happened. So it was nighttime there, and someone ran into the room and turned the TV on, and we just knew, like, oh, wow, everything just changed. Like, the Marine Corps as we knew it just totally changed, and it did.
Wow. Yeah. So how long was it from then until your first combat deployment?
It was a little over a year. So what happened is, that was September of 2001. Immediately there's this huge spool up. We're going somewhere. Yeah. For us, that ended up just being that we flew down from Okinawa to Guam via Iwo Jima. To this day, probably the most questionable thing still ever did in a 53. All that over open ocean time. Oh my gosh. Yeah, we got dragged by Hercs, of course. So aerial refuel all the way to Iwo, spent the night, then on to Guam. We formed a special purpose MAGTAF, and the whole time we're like, how are we getting to the Middle East from here? Like, what's the plan? And of course, there really wasn't one. So yeah, after about a month of that, we just went back to Okinawa and reset. So we ended up coming home that January. So that would have been January 2002. And then 1 year later, we deployed as a full 1.0 squadron to go to Operation Iraqi Freedom. So that was in January 2003 when we got on the ship here in San Diego, set sail for the Persian Gulf, and then got there, a couple months later and started doing all the stuff we were doing to build up to get ready for OIF. And so then that first combat flight was actually that March. So March 21st of 03, and that photograph there is actually me and our XO sitting on the sponson waiting to get told it was time to turn up for that mission that we had the hard landing. So that photo was taken about 2 hours before that happened.
Wow.
Okay. I'll try and put that in for those that are not watching, that are just listening. I will try to put that photo in on the podcast itself, because if you're listening on Downcast or Apple Podcast app, you can see the photos as I chapterize. So, well, very cool. Well, okay, we went way past flight school. Let me just ask, before we circle back around, was there anything memorable about flight school? Any funny thing that happened, or frightening thing that happened, or
no? Honestly, flight school went eerily smooth for me, knock on wood. And I was constantly paranoid that I was going to screw something up, which is probably why it went okay. Like, I studied nonstop. I was always ready for my flights. But I got to do some cool stuff. Like in helos, we did a cross country and went down to Key West and, places like that. So I got to bang around the country a little bit doing cross countries and whatnot, which was a great experience.
Okay. And was it just you and the instructor, or were there 2 or 3 students?
So it was just me and an instructor. So I did a couple on a T-34 that were great. One of them was with that mentor of mine where we came all the way out to Yuma because he wanted to show me all the Yuma ranges because he loved them so much as a WTI, weapons and tactics instructor himself. I had no idea at the time that I would end up spending countless hours in those ranges later.
Up in the chocolate mountains.
Yeah. And then once I was in advanced helos, we would do cross countries where they take two students and we flew down to Key West and you and another student just alternate legs on the way down and back. But those were fun too.
Nice.
Yeah. Good time.
Nice.
Flight school was good.
That's awesome. Well, now obviously you did well because you had your choice.
And, I did okay. Yeah.
That says something. That's saying something right there.
Right?
I did all right. Yeah. I did all right in flight school. It worked out well. But I was, honestly, I'll tell you, part of that was just I was hell-bent on doing well because, I went to school at Texas Tech. I had a, kind of a not impressive degree. I was not the pedigree guy when I showed up at OCS, and I was very aware of that. So I felt like from the very beginning, like, if I'm going to make it, I'm going to have to just outwork everybody. So that was really my tactic. So I just worked my ass off. And honestly, that's how it ended up going well. And then from there, have a little success early. It's like anything else in life. It just built on itself. And I just really kept that going the whole time I was in the Marine Corps.
Well, you became a MOTS instructor, and that's
I did the same thing, but that's because I was afraid of helos. Oop, sorry, Fig. Damn.
Oh, you're good.
Go ahead, Fig.
I was just going to say it's a testament to your work ethic and how MOTS instructors aren't just made overnight. That's kind of a thing all by itself. Sure. And I hope we're going to get into a little bit of that before this is over.
I will say though. Oh yeah.
Yeah, we've talked about what MOTS is a couple times, but we've never really talked about the work that it takes to become a MOTS graduate, let alone a MOTS instructor. I mean, that's living, eating, breathing, crapping tactics and manuals and weapons 20 hours a day.
It is, but I'll tell you, that was my goal, was to go to WTI and graduate as a student when I checked into the fleet initially. And I knew what it was really just because of the mentor I'd had in primary. And so that was kind of a goal I'd set for myself. So I pushed real hard to, anytime there was flight time available, I was throwing my hand in the air and I was taking it. I would do anything I had to do to get extra hops, extra sim time. And it didn't take too long for, the senior guys in the squadron to realize that that's what I was doing or that I was willing to do that. And that helped. So it helped me pick up some quals a little quicker, earlier. And then the war broke out, and really that was the catalyst for everything from that point because I ended up doing 4 deployments and stayed in the squadron for almost 6 years on my first fleet tour.
Whoa.
And that obviously helped a ton. So I did the UDP to Okinawa, went to Iraq in 2003. Then I went back to Iraq in 04 and 05. So through the course of all of that, it was just a ton of flight time and a ton of combat flight time doing real things. And so I was able to progress.
So how much flight time did you wind up with in the 53? And how much combat flight time? How many missions?
Just shy of 3,000 hours total, I believe, with just about 1,000 MVG hours and 800, I think, combat hours, something like that. Like it was a lot of red time.
So how come you don't talk like this naturally when you're just talking?
I don't know. That's a great question.
Okay. So you mentioned quals, and that means qualifications. What kind of qualifications does a fully qualified CH-53 pilot have?
So working up through the ranks, so I got you start out aircraft commander's the first thing you're shooting for, just like in every other platform. And I actually got that done on my first deployment to Okinawa, and then came back. And I'd picked up section lead, so you can lead a flight of 2. I'd picked up terrain flight instructor, so you can teach guys how to fly low, 200 feet and below. I was a functional test pilot. So I was moving along pretty good. And then when we went to Iraq the first time, I actually got my division leader check done in Kuwait, like right before the war started. So at that point, I was like, call it mid-level qualifications guy, even though I was still a pretty junior captain. And then I got the experience of flying in Iraq the first time. we came home and we did a quick turn because there was this brief period there where it was like, okay, the war's over. You guys are going back to the unit deployment program rotation. And our squadron just happened to draw the short straw. So I came home from Iraq and the first time, I think it was July of 2003. And then we deployed again that October. Initially to go back to Okinawa, but the whole time I was like, we're not going to Okinawa. We're not staying here. Iraq's still, there's stuff going on, and that's exactly what happened. We got to Okinawa, and almost immediately our CO's like, hey, we're packing these aircraft up and going back to Iraq. So then we went right back to Iraq for 2004. And that deployment wasn't quite as kinetic or busy, but it's because at the time, the Marine Corps was really just setting up the battle space. So there was a full up 1.0 squadron on the way to Iraq from back here at Miramar. And our, call it half a squadron or 0.5 in Okinawa, took another 8 aircraft to Iraq just so there'd be extra heavy lifting theater to set up the battle space. So for those few months, we were really just setting up all the FOBs and moving people and stuff around. And it wasn't until the tail end of that second deployment to Iraq where we started doing like named operations and stuff again. But that was not till the very end.
Okay.
Of that second one.
Yeah.
And then while I was there for that second one, I did my night systems instructor check ride, which is the last big wicket you have to hit before you go to WTI as a student.
Okay.
And so then we came home from Iraq the second time, and then I went to WTI as a student. But it was an interesting time to go to WTI as a student. You know, like I know you all have talked about it on the show. It's like, call it the Marine Corps version of Top Gun, but all the different platforms come and play. But it was interesting time to go as a student because we all have more combat experience than the instructors on staff.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't happen very often.
Yeah. And so, and those guys, they're all rock stars, right? I mean, they all got handpicked to be there. They're extremely capable. They were senior to us. They had more experience than us, but we had more literal red time. So that, of course, it made for some interesting discussions and debriefs in the ready room a couple of times.
Bullshit.
Yeah. And I had a couple of peers in my class that were quick to be like, we don't do it that way in real war. You know, you get those kind of comments. And,
ouch.
Yeah. And so there was a little bit of headbutting going on there, but we got through it and it worked out.
Yeah. Okay. So Bago asks, does each platform have its own course? Is it all blended? How does MOTS work?
Yeah. So it ultimately is all blended, but the way it works is there's a few weeks of academics, 3 weeks of academics followed by 3 weeks of flying at the time. There's an extra week in there now that's built in as a safety course, but essentially the academics start with everybody in the room together for what we call generics, and then you go to commons. So all the rotary wing guys together, all the fixed wing guys together, all the ground guys are together. And then you go to your specific type model series academic instruction for the third week. And then the flight phase works in reverse. So for the first week, it's just 53s, flying 53s. Second week, it's all the rotary wing guys playing. And then the last week is FineX, and everyone's playing together. So by the time it's done, the idea is that all of your weapons and tactics instructors are experts on the entirety of the aviation combat element. And you all get your air mission commander qualification. So you understand how to integrate all the platforms and any mission plan and then go execute on a high level when you get back to your squadron.
Okay.
So pretty neat program.
Yeah. And the academics, how long in the classroom, and then how long were you studying everything you'd been, and how much you were expected to know before you showed up?
We were expected to know a lot when we showed up, and you have what's called an inventory exam literally at the end of the first day of academics where they're just kind of seeing what you know. And that exam is an ass kicker. Like, I don't know that anyone ever actually passes it. And at the time, I'm sure they don't do this anymore, but at the time, the way we take the inventory exam, you're in class all day doing all the introduction stuff. And then at the end of the day, you go to your individual ready rooms for your inventory exams. And the instructors would pass out beers and turn on some heavy metal, and turn it up to Mach 10. And that was the environment you took your inventory exam in. And then they'd come around, pick them all up. And then the next morning when we came back, you would start out with a debrief about how dumb you all were and how much you sucked at the inventory exam and how much work we had to do, So,
and the highest score is an 18.
Yeah. It was designed to show you that you did not know everything yet. And then, but from there, if you're not in class or flying, you are studying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
It was an ego check for you at the door there.
It was intense.
I got to back up real quick.
It was. And I'm pleased to say that years later, I kept that tradition. Yeah.
Red time. I know what you're talking about. Why is it called red time? What is red time?
So red time, combat time, when it's logged in your logbook, is literally in red ink.
In red ink.
Yeah. Vice standard black.
Right. I just wanted to get that out there. That's not really an acronym, but you said it, and I'm thinking there's going to be some people that don't know what red time is. So thank you for defining that.
Yeah, fair enough. Sorry, I didn't think about that when I said it either.
Hey, quick side question, and let's get back to Mott's and the progression on your career. How did you get from Okinawa to Iraq when you packed up on that?
We put the aircraft in 53s inside of Air Force C5s. You can stuff two 53s in a single C5, and so that's how we moved them. But it's a pretty big operation. You got to take the whole rotor head off the 53. It's a lot that has to go into it. Then you literally also have to partially deflate the tires just to get that last couple inches you need to get it up the ramp and into the cargo bay of the C5. So we ended up with 4 C5s, 2 53s, and a couple of groups of Marines on each one that flew from Okinawa all the way to Iraq. And that second time we went back is when we first took over Al-Asad, which became basically the hub for the Marine Corps and really the coalition from that point forward in the war. But we were the first group of Marines to show up there and arrive at Al-Asad, and we were taking it over from the Army. So our initial turnover there was with the Army. So pretty neat.
Oh, yeah. And so either Bago or Sticks has just put up the photo of a 53 being shoved into the nose of a C5 Galaxy.
Yeah, it's wild.
Is the tail portion just kind of halfway disassemble and fold down, or is it off?
Well, the tail is built to fold for Navy shipping. So the main rotor blades fold back, the tail folds back. But to get it in there, we had to take the whole rotor head off for C5 movement, and then we put them all back together as soon as we got to Iraq and started going again.
Asking a lot of your troopers.
Yeah, our maintenance Marines did an awesome job, so we were able to pull it off. But that second deployment was interesting. I mean, outside of that, I would say we also, for my second deployment to Iraq, our CO, he was a damn character. I mean, the guy used to literally walk to the aircraft with wearing an ascot, flapping in the wind, and a lit cigar. He had a larger than life personality.
Is that Haboob? Is that what?
Yeah. So one night,
was that his call sign?
No, a haboob is like a big Iraqi dust storm. They were haboobs. That is a great picture of a haboob right there that I sent you guys. Yeah. So we're out flying one night. It's a low light level night, and we're on our way back to our home base of Al-Asad. And I was flying with a co-pilot, a young guy. He was barely qualified to be on the damn flight. And our CO was Dash 1, was in the lead. And he used to do this thing where he would kind of edge towards, say, the hot spots. We always used to joke like he was trolling for fire or something. But so that's going on. And then I actually took the controls just in the nick of time because I was just randomly, because I'm like, hey, to the young guy I was flying with, I'm like, hey, let me show you something. So I grabbed the controls, and right when I took the controls, like everything just went haywire. Like it felt like we slammed into something, but we were still flying, but the gauges are bouncing around all crazy. And mind you, at the time, our tactics were to fly low level. So when this starts, we're at 200 feet. But what had happened is we ran into one of those haboobs, and because it was low light level, we never saw it coming. We just slammed into it, and now we're in it. So it's full instrument flight rules situation. We're inadvertent IFR in this crazy ass dust storm, but the dust storm is so violent. This young guy's thinking,
what a buffoon, man. I was flying just fine, and they give him the controls, and things go to shit.
That poor guy, man. That poor kid. He was terrified, but I give him credit. He did a great job for me. He gave me great talkies because I was like, hey, look, dude, I need you to just be telling me what the rat out's doing. I need to know how high off the ground we are. That's the most important piece of information you can keep feeding me. But our vertical speed indicator, VSI, is like it's just bouncing up and down because of the atmospherics are so screwed up inside of that haboob. But I just sucked in real tight to the Dash 1 where I could see him.
Cushion? Oh.
Yep. Well, no, I got right at probably the closest form I've ever flown in my life. And right then our CO comes up on the radio and is like, "Little Sporty, you still with me?" And I was just like, "Yes, sir. I'm on board." And I just stayed basically welded wing with him all the way back. And it took about 15 minutes to get back to Al-Asad. And it was a really long 15 minutes. Felt like more like 15 hours. But we got back, and and poked around until we found the runway and got down and made it through it. But it was a dicey flight, and we were very fortunate to walk away from that, because there were definitely other crews in Iraq that ran into similar situations and it didn't work out well.
Yeah,
Yeesh.
yeah, no kidding. And Bago points out, RADALT is short for radar altimeter. It's actually sending a signal down, telling you with a radar signal bouncing back, telling you how high you are off the deck. So.
Yeah.
Much more accurate than a barometric altimeter in a storm like that.
Yeah, it was a dicey flight for sure. It was one of the dicier flights I had. I mean, there were different times we got caught in the dust storms, and flying at night in Iraq and Afghanistan was always a bitch, because there's almost never a horizon. When there's no moon, there's just nothing. There's no light to amplify. But when you ended up in one of those, it was real challenging.
Well, how was the visibility in the cockpit? Because you're now breathing that shit in. It's not just.
It wasn't too bad. We could still see, but yeah, as you know, you're flying NVGs, so you're looking through the goggles out of the aircraft. You're looking under the goggles inside, and it did almost look like there was haze, like there was a lot of dirt in the air for sure, but it wasn't keeping me from seeing anything. Yeah, but I wasn't too worried about it.
Blowing dirt out of the snot locker for a couple of days, though. I bet after.
It was legitimate. We all looked like sugar cookies by the time we got back in the building after we got back and shut down. That walk back to the building was rough.
Oh, man.
Definitely.
But at least it was cool and comfortable in oh, no, wait, never mind.
Yeah. That place.
Yeah, I had a buddy who, he was a master sergeant in the Mass Guard, and they wound up getting deployed and going over there. And he said to me, "You ever walk through the exhaust of a jet engine or a bank of generators?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "That's what it feels like when you want to cool off over there. You walk through the exhaust bank of the generators." So,
yeah, he's not wrong.
Oh, man, right?
Not wrong at all.
I can attest to that.
Yeah. Well, but it was good.
All right. There was something more in my notes here about the CO too. So he lit a lit cigar around the helicopter. Yeah, everybody loved that, I'm sure.
I'm not saying the guys didn't smoke every now and then, but for the most part, it was a crew chief in the back, and they would do it back by the tail so it wouldn't waft up and you'd smell it. But it happened. But the CO was one of those guys that was bold enough. He just didn't give a damn. He just literally strapped into the aircraft with a lit cigar going, and off you go. He was an interesting guy, for sure. He was good.
Oh, that's awesome. With
it was fun.
One of our earlier guests, Sugar, met JFK, and that was one of my favorite stories. And President Kennedy standing on the deck of a carrier goes,
"Anybody got
can I smoke out here?" Everyone's like, "You don't smoke on a carrier?" "Yes, sir, Mr. President. It's your aircraft carrier. You do any damn thing you want."
That's hilarious.
So,
that's good though.
So. Yeah, right. I mean, it's your aircraft carrier. You want to blow it up? It's all your.
Yeah. But then that deployment was good, and so when we came home from that second Iraq deployment was when I went to WTI as a student, and there was like a whole bunch of crazy stuff that happened during that period while we were turning over. But really, what was going on in theater was we were transitioning to fight the counterinsurgency. So when I went back to Iraq the third time, my fourth deployment on that first fleet tour. By that point, I'm the squadron WTI, and we dropped right into the middle of it, and things were going. It was kinetic. We'd figured it out, so to speak, like how to bring this fight to the insurgency. So that deployment was really busy. We got really involved in the named operations on that deployment.
I was going to say, is that the one you said there were 67 named operations?
We ended up doing 67 named operations, and at the time, I remember thinking like, no 53 squadron's ever going to do this again. Like it was just so many. So unusual, because a lot of what we did do was call it the logistical stuff, right? Hauling ass and trash, moving people, moving stuff around the battle space. But we got into doing a lot of tactical missions at night on that deployment, and partially because there was a super secret task force that had been formed, and that was also on Assad with us. And they had support from the Night Stalkers, the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment from the Army.
Right.
Okay.
But the Night Stalkers at the time still had all their 47s tied up in Afghanistan. So these guys had the 60s, they had Little Birds, but they didn't have any heavy assault support. So very early in the deployment, these two guys come walking over to our spaces, and it just, me and this other buddy of mine who were senior captains happened to be in our ready room when they walked in, and they were just looking for an informal feasibility of support. So, you know, before they ran any official requests, they wanted to know if we thought we could do it. And so, of course, you know, a couple of captains making handshake deals that aren't ours to make. But we were like, hey, I tell you what, they were asking if we could internal some vehicles they had. So we're like, yeah, bring them over to flight line. We'll load them up and make sure it works, and then we'll run the requests. And sure enough, they brought them over, and we're pulling all these weird vehicles they had into the back of a 53. And we're like, yep, they'll fit. Let's run the requests up. So then from that point, they went to their chain of command. We went to ours. We ran the request up, met in the middle, and we started working with them, which was pretty damn cool. So we got to do a lot of stuff in support of them on that deployment. That really kind of broke it open on the named operations. And so doing that with them and doing it well, then the Marine Corps was still feeding us more stuff. So we were out there, it seemed like about every other night once we got rolling, doing some kind of named op, which was really awesome. It was a fun.
And was that still out of Al-Asad there, Whisky?
Yep. Yeah. So that was out of Al-Asad. And at that point, Al-Asad for quite, a few years after that just became the Marine Corps hub, for all aviation in Iraq. But it was a fun deployment. We got to do a lot of really cool stuff with those guys. So that photo you showed earlier was from the same photo session that's on the cover of the book. And that was actually me flying that 53 when that photo was taken. But yeah, right there, it's just a different angle of a upcoming picture that ended up on the book. But those are a bunch of old burned out Iraqi vehicle hulks that were sitting around the base, and we just asked if we could move them out to the test fire area so that our crew chiefs would have real targets to shoot at when we took off from the runway.
Nice.
And so someone sent combat camera out to take those photos, and we ended up with some pretty cool ones.
That's an awesome picture. Uh-oh. Repeat.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it turned out. It was interesting. I saw that picture in a few different places a couple of different times after that, but then it obviously made the cover.
Nice. Yeah, no, and let me tell you, folks, you're going to get sucked in from the first chapter to an amazing story. This is a great book, Hangar 4. I was shocked to see how many squadrons shared one hangar space there at Miramar.
Yeah.
Never heard of such a thing. So that's cool, especially a squadron with so many big airplanes. It's not like it was a bunch of tiny airplanes in there.
Yep, right there in the middle of the Miramar flight line is Hangar 4. Still home to the 53 squadrons to this day. That's it. So it was neat. And obviously I ended up using that as the title of the book because I did all my fleet time on the West Coast. And so it was kind of like the central place the story keeps coming back to. So I did, like I said, almost 6 years my first tour. So then after that third Iraq deployment, I got asked to go be an instructor at MOTS 1, which was awesome. So I went and did that for 3 years. I figured if I couldn't be flying in the war anymore, I may as well be getting the next generation of guys ready to go, which was cool. Yeah, it was a really rewarding tour. Then they spun me through a year at command and staff, and then right back to Miramar, went right back into the squadron and took a jet to Afghanistan, which was pretty badass for sure. Because for that one, I took half the squadron to Afghanistan, and they were doing this weird thing at the time where they were taking half a squadron from the East Coast and half from the West Coast and mashing them together to form a full squadron in OEF. So in our rotation, I was the dead OIC from the West Coast, but the East Coast squadron brought the flag in the CO. And that ended up being a great deployment. There was some natural, say, call it friction early, because you got, half a unit from one coast, right, and half from the other. And, I think most people who spend any time in the Marine Corps know definitely East Coast, West Coast, a little bit different, generally in how they function. But we were able to work through some of that early, which was good. And then from that point, it was off to the races. And again, we ended up getting mixed up with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, because early in that deployment, and we deployed in January, and in March, they were running a mission out on the Pakistani border, and they ended up rolling up a CH-47, one of their 47s over, and only a 53 can pick up a 47. 47 can't self-recover, so we got tapped to go run what we call a TRAP mission, tactical recovery of aircraft and personnel, to go get that aircraft. And it was the coolest mission I ever got to plan and fly by far, for sure. And so we got a call, it was around 1 a.m. one night, and telling us it was there. And then it was, I see Taco's comment down there. He's not wrong. That's about Iraq, though. But we had basically the night to plan that 47 recover, and we had to strip about 5,000 pounds off of our aircraft to make the math work. Oh, wow. But even that left us with no power margin in the plan, which the CG didn't like when we briefed him the next morning, our commanding general, because we're always supposed to have at least a 5% power margin, just for safety purposes and just to give yourself an out. But we didn't. But we planned it, and we ultimately got told the next day, hey, yeah, you guys are going. So we took off, flew out to the Pakistani border in the middle of the night where this thing was, met up with the task force guys at a forward operating base that didn't exist, that they called home, put the finishing touches on the plan to get in and out of the objective area, and then we went in there and got that thing right at sunrise, which was awesome. And we did it right at sunrise because it's the coldest time of the day. So for lift purposes, it just made the math, best case scenario. But
that's a great picture right there. It's showing you guys slinging it.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I can see it. It is a great picture.
Yeah, 53 carrying a CH-46, 46, 47?
47, yeah.
Yeah. So almost the same thing. And then Bago actually put something up on our Facebook group the other day about, it was a 53. It was slinging an F-35 and tanking on the back of a C-130 at the same time. Oh, he's got it there handy. Look at that.
That just happened.
Yeah, that just happened. And people on Facebook are going, that's bullshit. That's Photoshop. That didn't happen. Not possible.
That is,
I don't know which of those four pilots is more crazy, the two in the 130 or the two in the 53. But, or the person who said, all they have to do is pickle that 35 into the ocean. When things go to shit.
Yeah, they just did that. I think it was last week, but that's a 53 kilo, the new one, and so it's got a little bit more lift capability than the Echoes that I flew had. But pretty awesome aircraft. But we did do some training at Mott's, especially where we'd go up to the tanker with external loads under the aircraft. It was challenging, for sure.
Well, there was a picture a little bit ago somebody sent me one of our listeners sent me an email with a picture of it looked like a Humvee or two slung under a 53 while it was tanking. You could see the basket in the corner.
Yeah, we used to do that at WTI. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, we used to do that with the students at WTI. It was great. It's a fun evolution. It's tough, though.
All right. I'm going to change the subject. Well, actually, I have a quick question for you, Whisky.
Yeah.
First, Afghanistan. What years were you there? And were you flying out of one of the FOBs?
We went in January 2011, and then we were flying out of Bastion, which was also called Leatherneck. So the British originally built Bastion as a little FOB, and then the Marine Corps came in and moved a ton of Marines over onto the other side called Leatherneck, and then built the giant runway and a flight line on the other side.
Natty.
So we were there at Bastion. Yep.
I was there.
To operate out of.
I was there fall of 10 through the spring of 11. And
okay.
So we had a little overlap. I was flying out of Bagram.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, nice. We did overlap them for a couple months because we got there in January.
Okay, call sign Whisky.
There you go.
Admittedly, it was a liberty risk when I was a little younger, for sure. But the way I literally got that was on the way home from OIF, the Iraqi freedom, the first time. It was right after Bush landed on the carrier, and everyone was like, "We won the war." We had a beer day on the ship, which I would say the way that's supposed to work is everyone gets 2 beers, but that's very loosely enforced.
Well, fortunately, in this world, there are guys like Lawman who don't drink, and so
somehow the math works out, right? But it wasn't too far into that before it wasn't just me. I would say a lot of Marines decided that meant it was time to break out the secret stash for this. We won the war party, and I just happened to be one of the fortunate few that got snatched up for it after we brought our secret stashes out. which the Navy was not too pleased about, in fairness. So a few of us ended up getting in trouble over that. A lot of duty. Definitely got my ass handed to me a few times over that deal. And then ultimately got a cool call sign out of it.
There you go.
So I don't think we're going to get any more details than that.
out.
Repeat. That's probably good.
No. Hey,
Well, I suppose it could have been a lot worse.
Because I didn't
right?
pre-brief it. Yeah.
It could have been a lot worse, for sure. It worked out okay. I thought I was going to be in pretty deep there for a bit.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, man.
All right.
That's-
I was sweating it.
We have a new sponsor this week, FTI, Flight Training International, FTIratings.com.
Excellent. Hey there, aviators. It's Fig and Repeat, your co-host from So There I Was, the show where we share all the wild aviation stories and maybe even a few tips and tricks along the way.
That's right, Fig. And speaking of tips and tricks, let's talk about something every aviator contemplating the leap into commercial airline flying has to face: getting that airline transport pilot rating, the ATP.
The good old ATP rating. Remember those days, Repeat?
Ooh.
Getting your ATP with an FAA examiner in a piston engine plane that smelled like 100 low lead in somebody's old socks. You've never been inside of it before, let alone flown it.
Right? Those were crazy days. But you know what? Our friends over at Flight Training International have cracked the code on making this transition to getting your ATP or type rating way easier.
Founded in 1991, these guys have been helping pilots like us navigate the tricky waters of transitioning from military to commercial flying, or from commercial multi-engine rating to the PhD of flying the coveted airline transport pilot rating. And get this, FTI was originally founded to provide type ratings to pilots eyeing jobs at Southwest Airlines.
And talk about experience. The current owners have over 37 years of aviation under their belts. They've flown operationally in both the U.S. Navy and the Air Force, and they've been training pilots like us for the last 25 years.
And they've got an impressive list of clients, from the Air Force and Navy to FedEx, United, and even government agencies. These guys are the real deal.
Oh, absolutely, Fig. And they specialize in helping pilots just like you and me transition smoothly into the airline world. Whether you need an ATP CTP, which is what Congress mandated 10 years ago to even be allowed to take the ATP written exam, or an ATP rating or a type rating, they've got you covered.
And here's the best part of all, folks. They're VA approved. That's right. Veterans, you can use those benefits to make your transition even smoother.
Nice. Oh, and let's not forget about their instructors. These guys are active and retired airline pilots, many of whom are veterans themselves. No 300-hour wonders here, just seasoned professionals who know the ins and outs of flying airliners.
Plus, their training materials are top-notch, all iPad-based, so you can study at your own pace, wherever you are. And their courseware includes everything you need to succeed, from manuals to sample orals.
And get this, Fig, their footprints are designed to require minimum time on site, so you can save your leave for terminal leave instead of spending it all in training.
That's awesome. So what are you waiting for, aviators? Don't waste your time with some designated examiner in a light twin. It smells like socks and 100 low lead. Head over to FlightTrainingInternationalRatings.com. That's FTIratings.com. And tell them you heard about them on So There I Was for a $100 discount on any course you choose.
That's FTIratings.com for all your aviation training needs. Remember, when it comes to making the leap into the airline world, Flight Training International has your back.
So, good thing the inside of a 53 probably never smelled like old socks.
It smelled like hydraulic fluid, dirt, and stale sweat most of the time.
Right?
For sure.
Brutal. Yeah. And you mentioned earlier, 7 deployments. You didn't know whether you hit it right or wrong. I would argue that your bride probably says you hit it wrong.
Yes. Yeah, it was challenging to try to balance all that with home for certain. And I was very honest about that in the book, too. Like,
yeah.
I put that element in there, how difficult it was to I used to think of it as it's like you're living on two different planets simultaneously. You know, on the one you're this Marine aviator and you're deploying all over the world and getting into gunfights and doing all this crazy stuff, but then you're supposed to come home and try to act like a normal dude. Easier said than done, for sure. Bouncing back and forth.
Yeah, exactly. And that brings me up. There was a word that you used in your book, and we use it all the time, and I don't think we've ever talked about it on the show before, Fig, but it's something most aviators are pretty good at, and that's compartmentalization.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. How did you acquire that skill? Or was it just practice? Or
I think it was, honestly, it was somewhat out of necessity, but I did have a good foundation for that. Growing up, you know, my dad was a high school football and baseball coach in West Texas, and he was a hard ass. So he was on my case pretty good. And then I went across town in high school and played for another coach who was just old school hard. Guy ended up retiring years later as the winningest high school baseball coach in the United States. But so those two guys, growing up with them, had gotten me pretty good at, call that controlling your emotions in general, you know, staying in the right headspace. When, you know, and obviously they were teaching it from a sports angle, but it was very handy in what I went on to do in the Marine Corps. But I got very adept at controlling my emotions for certain, especially in the aircraft. And then just the compartmentalization just kind of came out of necessity. You know, things would happen as things got crazy. The only way you could maintain that emotional steady state that you needed to, or I needed to, was just I got really quick at just, let me pack that up and I'll stuff it down over here somewhere and leave it there for eternity, you know, at the time is what you're thinking.
So wait a minute. I just want to be clear. So you're saying that like team sports and a coach being a real dick to you at practice and telling you ain't worth shit taught you some discipline that saved your life maybe later on in life?
Great life training right there.
Yeah. This is how the guy was. My senior year of high school, first game of the season, I hit a home run in my first at bat. And I think I'm all cool because we're playing at a minor league ballpark in Midland, Texas. I'm cruising around the bases. I'm heading towards third, and he looks right at me and goes, "You're a senior still hitting fly balls. You're impossible." Like, he was pissed because he was the line drives, ground balls guy. Like, so it didn't matter that the ball went over the fence. It wasn't what I was supposed to do. But, you know, having a background with someone like that certainly was helpful going into the Marine Corps and everything I did later.
Well, yeah. No wonder you were laughing at the drill instructor. Yeah, they were funny, but yeah, you know, you've been being yelled at for years.
Yeah, I was pretty used to it. Used to it.
Right. No stuff. No kidding. I mean, yeah, you can get a participation trophy and be a pussy for the rest of your life, or you can actually learn something and grow up, you know. So good for you.
Pretty much. Yeah, it's awesome. Good. It helps.
So, yeah, being able to put things aside that aren't important right in the moment is a big damn deal, especially in aviation. I imagine it's the same way in medicine and probably a couple other professions too.
Yeah, I used to always think of it as like pilots have to have a short memory because whatever happened already, good or bad, has no bearing on what's happening next, right? So if you get caught up in any of that business either way, you're just asking for trouble. You can't dwell on mistakes, but you also can't start assuming you actually know what the hell you're doing and you're good, because that'll get you just as fast, right?
Right, exactly. and now I have an ability to tell my wife why I have a memory of a goldfish. Yes. No, honey, it's important to me. It makes me safer.
Yeah, it does.
Oh, man.
It can.
So, all right.
That's awesome.
So we've gotten you through captain pretty much at this point, and then you went and did some command and staff, and then you got promoted to major, ultimately a WTI instructor. Of all those things that, you know, I've just taken you through another probably 7 or 8 years of your career right there in 12 seconds, but I guess let's take it in chronological order there. What are some of the highlights there going down that?
Well, really, you know, for that first fleet tour, it was just the culmination of everything. So by the time I did that third combat deployment, I had all the quals. I was squadron WTI. That had been my goal all along. And the deployment just went really well for us as a unit. You know, did the 67 named ops. It was awesome. So that was like a real high note to finish on. And then I went out to MOTS to be an instructor at Yuma, Arizona. And that was just a really rewarding place to be because at the time, the Marine Corps was just starting to officially update all the tactics for the modern fight, right? Because all of our manuals, everything we were doing up to that point, were still kind of Cold War tactics.
Yeah.
So I got to be at MOTS at a time when we were updating all the syllabus, the academic package, the flights and everything to better prepare the students for what was happening at the time in Iraq specifically. And that was neat to be part of that and be instructing there during that. And I also just loved that at MOTS, you travel around and visit all the fleet squadrons to do what's called fleet support, because there's a couple of different qualifications that only a MOTS 1 instructor can give, primarily night systems instructor. And then obviously you got to go to the WTI course at MOTS 1 to become a WTI. But so I enjoyed that too, because I got to travel all over the, East Coast, West Coast, Hawaii, and fly with the squadrons to do fleet support. And that was a good education as well.
How many?
Okay.
How many years active duty did you do there, Whisky?
Right at 20, actually. So when I went to MOTS, I was getting close to 10 years, because I went in 2006. Stayed there till 2009. So I crossed over the 10-year mark while I was there. Decided, or I should say, my wife and I decided to go ahead and stay around for another 10 years while we were at MOTS. And so finished up there, did the quick turn through command and staff, then went right back to Miramar. Did the Afghanistan deployment, which was a great deployment, because after we did that mission with the Task Force 160th, we recovered that 47 for them. It was just game on, and it really opened the floodgates. So I, like I said earlier, I didn't think we'd ever do, or a 53 squadron would ever beat the 67 named ops mark from 2005, but we ended up doing 144 on that Afghanistan deployment. So we got on a clip where we were basically doing one every night. And thankfully we had a squadron that had the depth of crews that was possible. Yeah. But I was the OPSO, so I was getting to orchestrate all of that, and I had a great team of company grade WTIs, of course, but we were able to put a plan together week in and week out that supported it all, and then went and made it happen. But it was a really dynamic deployment for certain.
Here's a good question for one of our listeners.
Okay, well, that's a better question that just came up on the bottom there. Listener Mark Miller says, how much could you inform the change of tactics using your experience, or was the syllabus change handed down from above? Because my question was going to be something to the effect of, was it like when you went through as a company grade and all these guys that were there as instructors had less combat experience? Now, I imagine when you went through, there were not many guys that had less combat experience than the
it totally
students.
Flipped on its head, because the generation of guys that I went to MOTS with as instructors were the guys that had done 2-3 deployments to Iraq already. So, and that was true for the entire building. So every type model series was that group of people. And so there was a little bit, I would say, of guidance from above as we were updating all the tactics, but for the most part, it was really just us, the instructors. So, and I remember at the time thinking like, damn, this is how this works? You got a bunch of senior captains and really kind of junior majors that had just been doing it for all those years, but we were considered to be, the experts and the guys to come up with it. And so we really, everything we did from the academic and the flight syllabus was really us. And we got some guidance from our commanding officer, who was an awesome guy. But for the most part, it was just what we came up with and decided, hey, this makes sense, and this is how we need to train and how to get these guys ready to go. And we tweaked it. It was really cool.
That's impressive.
Nice. Oh, that's awesome.
It was cool to be part of that.
And so the other interesting thing I saw in your book was, talked about company grade, field grade, and then there's obviously flag grade. So company grade is lieutenants and captains. Field grade is majors through colonel. And then flag grade is generals, obviously. But you said, as lieutenants and captains, you hated the field grade guys, particularly the majors. And then you had to hate yourself when you got promoted to major. So
that is how I felt about it. 100%. Right. I spent so much time as a captain hating on the majors that once I became one, I was like, damn it, now I am one of them. Now what am I going to do? And it took a while. And fittingly, the Marine Corps had me wear that rank longer than any other rank I ever wore. So I think I was a major for almost 7 years, and I felt that was my penance for all the smack that I talked about majors when I was a captain. But, in fairness, they weren't all bad. There were a couple of great ones I was fortunate enough to serve with. But it's still general principle. We always gave the major shit about pretty much everything. growing up in the squadron.
Okay.
And then that photo was that you just put up was me and my captain WTI when we were in Afghanistan in 2011. So I was part of the problem at that point. That's when I was a major and was the OPSO. For sure.
Beautiful. So you were the OPSO for the entire squadron, but the OIC for your squadron det, which became part of the combined squadron.
Exactly.
Right? Is that what I read?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was a unique relationship. So I kind of had some added responsibility there. And, you know, in fairness, sometimes I handled that well. Sometimes I could have handled it better, for sure. But it's in the book this way, and I said it in the very beginning of the book, but I kept a journal the whole time I was in the Marine Corps. It's a super nerdy thing to do, but I did, and I had it. So when I wrote the book, I stayed true to the perspective that I had at the time in the story throughout, even if I now know that perspective was flawed. And there were certainly points in the book where I was like, man, you screwed that up, or you were really being an asshole, or whatever. Yeah. But I felt like it was important to tell the story from what was my situational awareness at the time. What was I seeing at the time? What was I thinking based on what I knew then? You know, so you can see that development through the 20 years of how my perspective kind of grows and changes and morphs, and your self-awareness increases and all those things.
Sure. And what was the biggest surprise going back in? And I'm going to ask that here in a second, Sticks. I promise. Yeah. What was your biggest surprise going back and reading your journal?
I think the biggest surprise was, so I hadn't looked at it in a few years when I started this project. So I really wrote the book in 2022, just at night and in my spare time. Mm-hmm. But I hadn't looked at it at all in a few years when I started that. So the thing that was cool about it was I would sit down to write, and like 2 hours would go by, wouldn't have written a damn thing. I was just reading. And what was happening is I was going back through, there were so many things that I had just literally forgotten happened, and some of them were key things that had happened, like, hey, we ran this raid and got this guy, and that's where we got the intel for this big mission that we did for Matador. I would never have remembered that, but I had written it down, so I was able to capture it. But also, there's all the funny, dumb stuff that happened along the way, which was nonstop in any squadron. I jotted down a fair amount of that too. So it was good to go back and relive it for sure.
Give us a couple of those.
Well, I will tell you, it's in the book. But we had a WTI when we went to Iraq the first time. God love him. Call sign Krusty, still a very good friend of mine. But that guy was a walking comedy show, and he was very good, especially about saying and doing inappropriate things that would get the majors in particular like quite riled up. So they had these. Or restrooms, if you will, when we went forward for OF1 in this little airfield called Jalabah. It was basically just a couple of runways out in the middle of nowhere, but we had piss trenches and the little plywood shitters and all the other expeditionary Marine Corps things. But he'd be out there in the morning at the piss trench, and everyone's walking by and everyone could see everyone, just pretend like you're not. But he would just have a toothbrush in his mouth, be waving "Morning, ladies," when to whoever was walking by. He was always just doing stuff like that to make people uncomfortable, so to speak. But it was great comic relief of some of the funnier things that he did.
That's awesome.
Growing up in the squadron, for sure.
Yeah. So the question I referenced earlier that Sticks is asking, which is a great one, is what would Lieutenant Colonel Whisky tell Second Lieutenant Whisky?
It's a good question, and I would say honestly, I was very fortunate. I had a good run, but I do think the lesson I learned that would have been good to latch onto earlier was don't put yourself in a position where someone else is going to determine your fate. And I definitely did that on a couple of occasions, and I would have made my life a lot easier if I'd made a better decision or two to not do that. And obviously, the story where I got my call sign is one of those, because I could have really gotten, I was totally at the mercy of the command at that point. And thankfully they saw enough in me to beat me up a little bit, but then let me keep going, but that's probably the biggest one. I won't say fell victim to, made the mistake of being pretty convinced I was 10 feet tall and bulletproof there when I was a young captain. So it would have been a little better had I not gone so headlong into that, for sure.
Well, there's truth in that, but man, I got to say, Aren't those the guys who went out there flying the airplanes and squeezing the triggers?
Well, I'll tell you, that's what I was convinced of. So to me, it was just like balls to the wall all the time, right? In the aircraft, out of the aircraft, whatever we're doing, go 1,000 miles an hour, and someone come make me stop. But it was definitely, I mean, we lived that way. That was how we lived.
Yeah.
Can I read a quick passage from the book? Because I love it.
Yeah, man.
It's in the beginning. Yeah. It's for the Marines. I just want to read if Hollywood assembled a team of the best writers, they couldn't possibly dream up a cast of characters more remarkable and entertaining than the Marines who exist in every squadron and battalion in the Marine Corps. I mean, that is just prophetic. I mean, that is spot on.
Right.
The blend of intellect, Bad-Assery, and Jack-Assery in the Marines that comprise those units is truly awe-inspiring. I mean, doesn't that take you right back to our squadron repeat? I mean, really, that is so beautifully said.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And their ability to say and do the coolest things within seconds of almost dying.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
amazing group of people. I mean, certainly for me, the entirety of the experience was made by the people I was surrounded by. The Marines to your left and your right. That was the reason that we did everything, and I loved it. I love those guys, all of them, for sure.
In fact, look, usually we name it after a show, after a book, but man, I'm really tempted to go with Bad-Assery and Jack-Assery.
That's a good one.
That's a
good one.
I know, I loved it. When I read it, I gut laughed. I was on the airplane coming out here a couple of days ago. When I read that, I gut laughed. I had the headphones in, and then I realized I was loud, and people were looking at me like, "What the hell is he looking at?" I loved it.
Yeah,
that's funny. That's great.
Yeah. So,
man.
How long did it take you to write this book? I'm always amazed by. I mean, because it's not a small thing. How long did it?
No.
How long did you work on this?
The process of literally writing, say, the first couple of drafts took me right about a year. So I started in January of 22, and at the end of the year, I was on like draft number 2, starting draft number 3, and starting to shop around for publishers and take the next steps. So about a year, and it was just, nights and weekends, and it was a spare time project. But that's when I started shopping around for publishers. And then early 2023, I had to send it to the Pentagon, to the Department of Defense Office of Pre-Publication and Security Review, because there's a lot of stuff in there that was classified at the time. So I had to make sure it was cleared. They had it for a few months, and while they had it, I settled on a hybrid publisher that I liked and had everything teed up and ready to go, and professional editor sitting there waiting. So the second we got it back from the Pentagon, went to work with the professional editor, and that was summer of 23. And then from there, it took us, 4 or 5 months to get it cleaned up and ready to go to print.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, it was a very interesting process, for sure. It was cool.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to have a signed copy, and I'll be sending you money for that shortly to cover all that. But tell us, can the general public get a signed copy?
Signed copies, I do off and on. So I've got a few events coming up. I've done a few in San Diego. I'll do a few more. And then on my website is isaacglee.com. There's a tab for events. And so it'll list events there. Every now and then, when I have the bandwidth, and I usually do this across my social platforms, I'll just post and say, "Hey, I've got a few books that I can sell directly, sign and ship." And so I'll generally do them in batches. They'll tend to be like 20 here, 20 there, just honestly for logistical purposes. Just because if I totally open up the floodgates, I might have to quit my day job and just sign books for a couple of weeks.
Right. Right. Does
every now and then
House help you out with that?
I wish, yeah. I wish. Yeah, it's all
Sink
good.
House being the bride, commander-in-chief of the house. Yeah.
Yes. No, that is totally time that I'm spending not doing other things that maybe I should be, for sure.
There you go. Okay.
Yeah, but it's been good. But it's on Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, the usual places.
Yeah.
Hangar 4.
Well, that's impressive.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome,
thank you.
man. Well, thank you for your service. If I don't say it right, I'm going to forget. But thank you for your service, Whiskey. I mean, 20 years on active duty Marine Corps and all those combat deployments. That's something.
Of course.
Thank you.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you guys for yours as well. It was good. I'd do it all over again, for sure.
I get it. But and the question is, would your wife and would your girls, that's that's I think it's harder on them sometimes.
It is. I mean, maintaining that balance of some kind at home is definitely difficult, and that was a big part of my decision process when I transitioned out at 20. Things had gone well. I had an opportunity. I probably could have stuck around. Most likely got promoted at least one more time or one more time.
Oh yeah.
But I just felt like at that time it was time to get off the train, give the kids
get off the crazy train,
to settle down, have so. Yeah.
So,
give the, and really that was as much for the family as me.
If you don't want to say live, it's okay, and I totally get it. Or do you still fly? Or what
I do not actually.
Well,
no, I don't.
Do you do as a retired Marine?
Yeah. So I decided that I wanted my last flight to be in an operational 53 squadron. So ultimately ended up with command in one of the West Coast squadrons out here, HMH 462. And my last flight with them, the day before my change of commands, the last time I flew an aircraft. And I decided that ahead of time. But I got this wild notion, like a couple other times in my life, where I wanted to just do something totally different, that when I got out of the Marine Corps, I wanted to do something totally different. So I actually networked like a maniac, did a bunch of homework, and transitioned into, running operations for businesses, like business operations. And I've been doing that for the last several years now. So worked for one company here in San Diego for about a year and a half, and then got bored, started a consulting company, and then ended up with another company that I've been with for the last few years. But I run operations for the company, which is, at this point, I think we have about 600 total employees. But it's not much different than the way I describe what I do now in operations is it's like being the OPSO, the AMO, and the XO all rolled into one job. So everything's my fault. That's the way I think of it. Yeah. It's a good time. So I do that, do some volunteer work. Yeah, do some volunteer work with a couple of nonprofits that help our Marines and sailors out here in San Diego. And when I'm not doing that these days, I'm doing book stuff. So that's been a fun little side project for me, for sure.
There you go. Oh, that's awesome.
Well, that's outstanding.
And you told me, and I forget how you phrased it, so forgive my old man memory. You were the first Combat 53 pilot to write a book about it?
Well, this is the first book that's come about flying 53s in combat and OIF, OEF. I think there is like a very, like an older book that someone wrote about flying Alpha Model 53s at the tail end of Vietnam, or that was part of the story. But assault support, hauling ass and trash is not something that's really been written about. There's a couple of the Task Force 160th guys have written books, but no Marines recently. So it was cool to just kind of capture that piece of history too on behalf of the community and get it out there to what that was like.
Oh yeah, no, that's huge. And now, and a 53 Alpha and a 53 Echo are practically different airplane, and very different airplanes in that sense.
For sure. We still had some 53 Deltas around when I was on active duty. And actually, when I was at Mott's 1, we still had Deltas, so I got qualified in the Delta 2, so I could fly with those students. But there was a big difference between the Delta and the Echo for certain, and so I'm sure the jump was even bigger from the Alpha to the Delta to start with.
Yeah.
And now they've got the Kilo, which is a completely different damn aircraft, systems-wise, fly-by-wire and glass cockpit, all the whiz-bang stuff, where the 53 Echo was still all very old school, control rods and steam gauges.
Right? No, that's amazing. Yeah, in fact, we got some Brad Silcott photography. What is it? BDSaviationphotography.com photos up on the live stream right now that they're putting up. But yeah, I can't imagine what the Kilo's like. Holy smokes!
It's a beast. It is definitely a beast.
Yeah. So I'm telling you, there are experienced aviators on the Facebook group going, "That's bullshit. That's Photoshop." It's like, no, this is on navair.mil. Yeah, it really happened. So
yeah, it's not.
Wow.
It's
Oh,
very
amazing.
real.
That picture that Bago just put up, or Sticks, it made the two Humvees look tiny hanging under that 50. There it is.
It
hanging
does,
under
right?
that 53.
It does.
They look like toys, and those are not small vehicles.
No, those 53, or I mean, those Humvees, man, you drive down the highway next to one of those things. It will, you don't want to hit one.
Yep.
Well, Whiskey, we have
And I
sucked
imagine
an
there's
hour and
armor
a
on there, making them
half
way extra.
out of your life, and it's gone really fast. And I want to say
Yeah.
thank you. It
good.
might be time to wrap this up and let you get on with the rest of your beautiful Southern California day.
Right?
That sounds good. Thank you, guys. I appreciate you having me. It was a blast.
Well,
Are
indeed.
we
And
gonna-
thank you for your service. Thank your bride and your children for the birthdays and anniversaries and all that stuff missed. That was,
Yeah, we'll do.
yeah, that was, what can you say? Thank you are
Yeah.
inadequate words for what those military families do to help let our veterans and active duty personnel make it happen. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I will definitely do that. And thank you guys for having me.
yeah, glad to do it.
Awesome
Who
book.
else should we roll some thank yous in here?
Thank you.
Awesome book. Yeah. Hangar 4, Isaac G. Lee, Lee. Go get it. It's a fun book. It's a fun read.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Yeah. Yeah. Fig, who else should we throw some thank yous at tonight?
Well, let's see. Off the top of my
Did we
head,
lose
it's
you?
right on the tip
There
of
he
my.
is.
It's right on the tip of my tongue. We probably, let's see. He's the guy that has Backbeat Media. That's, what's his name?
Starts with a D.
Dave Hamilton.
Dave Hamilton.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, we got to say thanks to Dave Hamilton. Thank you, brother.
Indeed. And he's got 3 shows of his own: the Gig Gab, the Business Brain, and the Mac Geek Gab. Fantastic podcasts. If you're a podcast fan, and we hope you are because you're listening here, those are good shows worth checking out. So we have a glossary. We've thrown out a few terms tonight that we may not have covered before. So there I was.us/glossary. And if we don't have something in that glossary that you want to see, Fig, what do you think? How would you write to us and tell us to get that?
Well, repeat
up to-
at sothereiwas.us, fig at sothereiwas.us. Or if you want a really smart answer, it's sticks at sothereiwas.us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, I noticed it was warmer today. We opened our pool. That tells me it's bikini season. Where would you go to get a
comes.
bikini, Fig?
Well, we have a merch store at sothereiwas.us/merch, which has, amongst other awesome things, a bikini. A So There I Was bikini. I shit you not.
Go get yourself one. Right on the bikini. So there I was. There I was. Gotta go do it. Hey, also, thank you to all the people who go to sothereiwas.us/Patreon and or /donate and throw your hard-earned money in our direction. We are ever so humbled because it helps
Very
us
humbled.
keep the tanks full, keep the engines running, and bringing these stories to you. Thank you. Indeed. We've had some slides up during this show from bdsaviationphotography.com and Badass Silcott taking those photos. So thank you, sir, for allowing us to use those. A couple other
Thanks,
folks
Badass.
here, Fig. Yeah.
Well, I hear the theme. I hear the So There I Was theme song cranking up. That is the music of the 2 Air Force F-16 pilots that make the Air Force sound good. Those are the Dos Gringos.
Count them. 2. Unos, dos. The Dos Gringos, indeed.
They have great music.
I don't
Not
know.
one bad
In
song.
honor of having another Rotorhead on the show, Fig, what do you think until next week? What
Don't.
advice can you give our folks?
Don't sit on the collective. Right?
Don't do it.
Don't,
Right.
don't do it. I don't know shit about the collective, but it sounds like a bad thing to sit on. That's all I'm going to say.
Right?
Well,
Exactly.
there I was, crossing the pond, and you could see that I wasn't exactly fond of all the shit I was wearing on that day. Now an F-16 is cramped enough, but it's even worse with all that stuff supposed to save your life. But we knew there was no way. 'Cause when you're going down the North Atlantic, man, it's over.
He said it's over.
And we are out.